Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a critical situation, the rapidly escalating Iran-Israel conflict. Our goal here is really to cut through the noise. We'll give you a clear day-by-day look at what happened between June 13th and 16th, 2025, and importantly, what the impacts are looking like. We want to get you quickly and thoroughly informed.
Oh, okay, let's unpack this. So, to really understand how things got so intense so fast, we have to go back to June 13th. That's when Israel launched its big first move, right? This air offensive called Operation Rising Lion.
That's right. It was presented as a preemptive strike, a really significant operation.
Yeah, the scale seems immense. We're talking about around 200 aircraft and drones.
That's the figure being reported, hitting over 100 targets across Iran.
And these weren't just, small military outposts. They hit major nuclear sites, Natanz, Isfahan.
Critical infrastructure, also IRGC command centers, missile factories. The strikes were widespread.
And tragically, key Iranian figures were killed. Reports mention IRGC Chief Hossein Salami, the Chief of Staff Mohammad Bagheri, and several nuclear scientists as well, at least 6 confirmed. It shows a very targeted approach aimed at leadership and technical capability.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. The reports about Mossad.
Ah, yes, the covert drone teams allegedly operating inside Iran.
Exactly. Apparently, they managed to disrupt Iran's missile response quite heavily. The initial estimate was maybe 1,000 launches possible.
Right, and reports suggested these internal actions helped bring that number down to around 200 actual launches.
That changes the game, doesn't it? Crippling response capability from within before the main attack even fully unfolds.
It speaks volumes about modern warfare tactics, definitely. Asymmetric approaches. But what's fascinating here is the immediate, significant response from Iran, despite that disruption.
Right, they didn't wait long at all.
No. On the evening of the 13th, they launched Operation Shoe Promise III.
Which involved,
yeah.
What was the scale of that?
Roughly 150 to 200 ballistic missiles, plus over 100 drones. A substantial barrage aimed at Israeli cities. Tel Aviv, Haifa were mentioned specifically.
And casualties in Israel.
Reports indicated between 22 and 24 Israeli civilians were injured or, sadly, killed. Although it's important to note, most of the incoming threats were intercepted.
By Iron Dome and allied defenses, yeah.
Correct. So even with potentially degraded launch capability, Iran still managed a major counterattack. It really highlights how complex defending against these kinds of assaults remains.
And things just kept escalating from there, didn't they? June 14th to the 16th.
Intensified is the right word. Israel continued its strikes.
Focusing on what? Still military targets?
Military, yes, but also nuclear infrastructure continued to be hit. And reports started coming in about media infrastructure in Tehran being targeted.
And hits on residential areas, too. That sounds like a dangerous escalation.
Yes. Civilian buildings were reportedly hit, leading to, significant panic and damage in Tehran. At the same time, Iran kept up its own missile and drone attacks.
Amidst all this, Israeli officials started claiming they had control of Iranian airspace. That's a bold claim.
It is. Whether it was complete control is debatable, but it signaled their operational confidence.
But the human cost, that seems to have really spiked in those days.
Absolutely devastating. Reports from Tehran described hospitals as completely overwhelmed. The term bloodbath was used.
What are the numbers we're hearing?
Around 1,300 wounded and perhaps 500 to 600 killed. Critically, most were reported to be civilians, children among them. It's a stark reminder of the price paid by ordinary people. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the international reaction is crucial. It wasn't just regional anymore.
Right. Calls for de-escalation started pouring in.
Immediately, from the G7, the EU, the UN, key regional players too, like Egypt, Turkey, China chimed in as well. The focus was on stopping the fighting and getting back to nuclear talks.
What about the U.S.?
The U.S. moved to reinforce its own assets in the region, aircraft carriers, missile deployments, but they also issued warnings against threats to their forces.
And former President Trump had a statement too.
Yes, quite a strong one, calling for Iran's unconditional surrender. A very different tone from the calls for de-escalation.
Meanwhile, other countries were getting their citizens out.
China, Egypt issued evacuation advisories. Ireland was arranging repatriation flights. It shows a level of global concern about safety.
And back on the ground, This spiraled into a civilian crisis pretty quickly.
A major one. Around June 15th, we saw this mass exodus beginning from Tehran.
Satellite images showed clogged highways, right? People fleeing north?
Exactly. Shelters in northern provinces were reported to be overcrowded. Figures suggest something like 100,000 Iranian civilians fled, at least temporarily, often because of warnings about strikes near weapons facilities.
And other factors making it worse?
Oh, definitely. Internet restrictions were reported, local lockdowns making movement harder, and then shortages fuel, groceries. A really difficult, frankly dire situation for many. This raises an important question, like several important questions actually, about the wider implications.
You mean legal, economic?
Precisely. Human rights observers are already raising red flags. Concerns that hitting civilian infrastructure like this could violate international law, potentially war crimes territory.
That's incredibly serious.
It is. And then there's the economy. Oil prices spiked mid-June, almost immediately. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz became very tense.
Flights were disrupted too.
Yes, flights into Israel faced issues, partly due to threats from groups like the Houthis, and countries like India expressed real concern about energy supply stability from the Gulf. It shows how localized conflict has global economic reach.
So what does this all mean for you, trying to make sense of this? There are some major concerns emerging, aren't there?
Absolutely. Several key things to watch.
Like the potential for the U.S. getting drawn in deeper, especially with voices like Trump pushing for more direct action.
That's one major risk. Another is regional spillover. How does this affect Lebanese Hezbollah or the Houthi actions potentially dragging Gulf shipping into it?
And the humanitarian crisis, obviously.
That's ongoing and severe. Plus, the economic shockwaves, particularly for energy markets, it's a lot to track. What we've really seen just in those few days, June 13th to 16th, is how incredibly complex and fast-moving this conflict is. It's truly multifaceted, with immediate, far-reaching consequences, military, human, economic, well beyond the immediate region.
And maybe something to think about as you process all this information. Does the sheer speed and the nature of the civilian impact we've seen here fundamentally change how the world thinks about intervention or responsibility, or does it just starkly reveal the limits of what global bodies can actually do in a crisis like this?